in. And really this whole thing is just a placeholder because we're just really building up anticipation for Pete's ultraviolet stuff next week. That's not unfair. This is only the warm-up act for that. And this was opportunistic because during the week I bought a port. So I thought we could talk about ports, and I know that Pete up in Scotland was thinking of going pen, and I think if you're going off the beaten track of having a nice, neat, compact camera, then you're going to suffer this stuff, and someone should break it to you gently, at least. I'm sort of filling in a bit because I think we should have one more person popping in. No, say hello, Penny. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Let's adjust me a bit. Yeah. Excellent. So let's start, because these things don't need to be super long, do they? So this week was wet lenses and ports, and sort of almost every housing now has a way of putting wet lenses on it. So this one has a thread. I'm sort of picking at the thread so you can hopefully hear it. And one of the weird things about those threads is, in a world where everything is different, where everything has sort of multiple standards, these threads are pretty much always the same. Oh, Chris has just arrived. And so the nice thing is you buy wet lenses by diameter and not by funny thread, usually. There are a class of wet lenses that are more complicated, that are fitted by bayonet, but usually they're fine. Hello, Chris. Oh. Excellent. So since we'll start from the most useful thing to have and work on to the stuff that only nerds could possibly have any interest in. I wonder if I'll swap to my other camera. Let's see if this works. Not brilliant. This is just my phone on a tripod being a participant in the call. So it's really nothing more or less than that. So I've got a number of wet lenses, and all you do is you buy your wet lens by size, usually diameter, and then by power. And I'm sure Pete would be able to say as much or as little as I can by power. So we've got a variety of wet lenses. And on the whole, wet lenses and are all specified sort of, I guess, with respect to what they do in air. And the sad fact is they all work better in air than they do in water, because these ones here, these are all macro lenses, all four of them. And although they look like they're solid glass, there's actually two elements in at least these smaller ones. So these are all quite thin. And these have two elements in, and I think they're sometimes called apochromatic lenses, because you could do all the magnification with one, like a magnifying glass that you'd hold as a child. But magnifying glasses suffer from light splitting through them. They act like a prism. So these have two lenses in, and they do the magnification as a two-part process. And to make life more difficult, oh, it was Chris sounding like a cow. I might have known. Okay, so these have two elements in, and they do the magnification as a two-part process, but the one in and one out are complementary as far as sort of chromatic problems go. So one corrects the problems that the other introduces. And that's why these things are much more expensive than you'd expect. Wet lens or macro lenses or macro filters on land start from almost nothing. I have a 5-piece set I bought from eBay for 20 quid. Each one is a single element lens, and they're all absolutely awful. They are dreadful. I never use them, but it kind of proved what you can do, and I use them in land camera classes just to demonstrate cheap add-ons. You can spend, literally 10 times that on a good one, and that's roughly what these are. These cost about £200 each when they're new, but they're pretty tough. They're very useful. And by the time they're secondhand, they've dropped. So these would sell between probably £80 and £100 secondhand, and they're always better value if you buy them in with a bundle. If someone's selling up all their stuff, you're not going to pay anything like the combined value. They'll throw these things in, and that's when I got this monster. Not sure. That looks like it might have 3 elements in. Or maybe that's 3 groups. Anyway, I've never used it because on the whole, you don't often need them. So Penny's here and has a TG. I don't think any TG really needs macro lenses on it because you can focus on the glass. But entry-level interchangeable lens people probably do need these because most sort of SLR-like little zoom lenses can't focus super close. So if you've got a pen and you've got the kit lens, you will probably want to get a macro lens so you can focus closer. If you've got some of the general purpose lenses, they'll focus pretty close. And so it's arguable whether you need this straight away, but adding one of these will make those focus closer, and SLR and interchangeable lens cameras tend not to focus so close anyway. So this can be useful, especially if you're in murky water and you don't want to have to stand off too far. So these lenses, these thin ones, are spec'd by focal length, and then they're described by the number of diopters they operate on, and those are effectively the same thing. So this is an in-on one, and I like this a lot. This got dropped walking up the ramp at Overstrand, and so it's no longer round. I don't know if you can see that. It's actually flattened on one side and started to leak inside. So I took it to bits, put it back together with sealant, and it's been fine ever since. And this one is a blah, blah, blah 165. And that's effectively 165 millimeters. It's dividing into a meter. And so this divides in about 6 times. So this is called a +6 diopter. It bends the light 6 times as hard. And that suggests it would offer 6 times magnification. But in all honesty, I think you'd be lucky to get stuff to double in size. What with the problems of getting your camera to focus through them and getting close enough to animals for them to stay around, and being in less than perfect conditions, you're hard pressed to see huge benefits through these. These are worthwhile, but maybe double magnification for a good close-up lens, or maybe 3 or so times for a normal kit lens if you're sticking one on. These Olympus ones, this one's the same. It says focal length 165, and I can quite imagine you can't read that. It's the phone's not being able to focus on things. Yeah, so that's 165. Oh, phone's crashed. Ah, well, I'll swap over to my other. Ooh, I'll swap over to me again. Hello, sorry about that. The phone, I think I might have squeezed one of its controls and it's decided to turn itself off. So the macro lenses, so these ones are normal. They're fairly easy to handle. I've got that one, which is 165. This is 1652. And while I go past, I would say this is a new one. And hopefully that looks nice. You can see through it clearly. And this is an old one. And on my screen, at least, it looks foggy. It doesn't look as clear because it's absolutely covered in scratches. I think almost no matter how careful you are with these, they pick up scratches as you handle them, you fit them and you unfit them, because fitting these fine threads is a royal pain half the time and not tremendous fun. So there's a lot of potential for scratching, but it has to be said, it's very hard to see sort of the problem with that when you actually use them underwater, because the water fills in the scratches and acts to complete the action of the lens. So you don't need to be too afraid of buying a damaged one. Obviously, it's a way of beating people down, but they still work pretty well. I use this one in preference to my Olympus ones because the knurled edge makes it a lot easier to handle. And once you've got one lens that's scratched to buggery, why are you going to get another one into that state when you could use this? Okay, this monster is it's got to be probably 3 times as heavy as the other one. This claims to be. Oh, Chris is coming back again. I'll let Chris back in. This claims to be a +10, and I'm sure this is stronger than the others. And so I think if I was going somewhere nice and tropical, and I absolutely positively had to take lovely pictures of pygmy seahorses, it's the kind of thing I might take along. And what I tend to do when you've got heavier lenses is to fit them initially, to go on the mission with the thing fully assembled, and then you can take it off, because taking them off is easy. Putting them back on when you're under pressure is slow and annoying. But taking them off is easy. So you go, you do the mission, you perform. Oh, we've got a John. And go, get your pictures, and then take the heavy lens off so you can go back to taking normal pictures. And of course, wet lenses aren't just for the kind of high-tech nutter who's taking pictures of slugs. You could do wide angle. And I suppose before I say wide angle, I should say all of these lenses, aside from that one that isn't round anymore, screw together. So you can stack them up. So in theory, you could combine all of these to produce a macro lens that's unusable because it focuses there with the depth of field of an atom, and is near impossible to use. Even 2 of the normal ones are highly unpleasant. So I think, and the quality drops off as you go through more and more glass, just because there's more and more distortions involved. Hello, John. Nice to see you. Anyway, so we were going to move on and say, well, what about wide angle lenses? I've got 2 wet wide angle lenses here, which are quite fun. And so they look a bit like a little dome, a little wider port. And this one's an in-on one. And this is the sort of shallow depth one for wide angle lenses that in-on make. So I think this is a, ooh, I thought this was a 26 AD, but this is apparently a UL H100 times 0.6. So this is made to go on wide-ish angle lenses and makes them wider angle lenses. And the H100 means that it can produce up to 100 degree angle of view. And the times 0.6 means it's 60% of the focal length of your lens, which is unhelpful because the focal length of your lens will give you a view, and this will make it look like that view is, let's say, about half as wide again. It's not quite, doesn't quite work out twice as wide because this has a flat front. And so again, this is spec'd for how it behaves on land, which is again, massively disappointing. These will work on land and they'll act like a nice wide angle lens with a 100-degree field of view. Chris is apologizing for interrupting, and he's just interrupted and with his apology. So there's nice for you. So this is a nice one. All the in-on stuff is really nice. It's nicely made, works nicely, and you'll see it used to have a nice sort of protective petal shade. But that got lost. So this is the 3D printed one. This is another sort of 3D printing thing. And again, I'm sure you could print them to be the right size and then they would be a sod to get on and off. This one is printed so you have to split it. It's not complete, and then cable tied tight so it fits on. And that means it's a disposable part that protects the main lens from damage. I don't know if the petals will do me much good. The other lens I've got is an oddity in that it's this thing, which is made to go on the front of compact cameras with stupid zooms. And if you've ever seen poor people carrying around a compact camera with a huge box front, because the lens can actually extend a long way. So they tend to put big box fronts on them. And then you can't get close to stuff, and you can't fit other wet lenses to them. They tend to produce frames to carry stuff like this. And this makes a narrower view, stronger lens back into really quite a wide angle lens. So I use this on my OMD with the 12 to 50 zoom. So up at the zoomy end or its macro end, it can work through this, and this will make it act like nearly a fisheye. And this one's actually got a dome on it. And that means this one is designed to give a roughly 100-degree view in its flat form, but the extra bit on the end, which is a two-part, which clamps over the end, gives it an airspace. So the thing inside acts like its land spec because it's protected from a flat interface with the water by this dome. Weirdly, so the lens is heavy, the dome's full of air, so it's manageable, but it's a bit long. It's quite a snout, and it's finicky because you have to set the depth or the distance this works from the front of your housing. And I've found that not all the lenses I've used it with work the same. So I've got to track down the one that doesn't work and label it, because this has spoiled a couple of trips by taking it out and finding I've picked up the lens that doesn't work with it. So this should work with most of the macro lenses and the kit zooms. So that's all harmless fun. What I should have said is one of these things, when you're carrying around pieces of glass like this, they're heavy and they will sink instantly, very, very fast. The old head of Sea Search was a specialist in losing these, and at least 2 or 3 times unscrewed these and just dropped them. And unbelievably had the gall to get everybody on the trip to go and look for them. So why are we going back to this site? Oh, it's very interesting. And while we're here, if you could just look for my lens, and always got them recovered. But because they're heavy, I tend to go over to a manageable piece of seabed to take them off. And if you're on a wall, you'd work over a small ledge if you could, if you're going to take them off or put them on, because they drop easily. If you've got cold hands, they'll escape. And then you can stick them in pockets, but pockets on wetsuits these days tend to be filled with D-rings and snap shackles and all the other things you need. So it's quite nice to have a bag on a carabiner that you can pop these into. And then you can shove the whole bag roughly into a pocket, and that keeps them safe. I think the Olympus macro lenses come with this lovely little neoprene pocket. It has no way of fixing it to anything else, and it floats. So the idea is like you battle these back in here, and then pop it away, and then pop that in your pocket, so you can lose it all at the same time. What I find, or have found, is that these IKEA pots are a really nice size for them, and they even curved at the bottom, and sort of they have a ridge inset at the top. So when you clamp them down, they don't press directly on the glass of the lens. So they're reasonable protection, even when they're smashed to pieces. So these are excellent. And I think an IKEA set, including, I don't know, it's 2 or 3 of these, is about £4. And then you get all the others for sandwiches, which is great. I'll waffle for a moment, and I'll see if I can restart my phone and work out why it was behaving so oddly. Because the next bit would be about Dawn's new macro port. Was one of my friends, I think I completely flattened my phone. One of my friends sent me a message during the week saying, oh, I've got a macro port. Would you like a macro port? And I instantly thought, not, oh, what a nice person remembering me. I thought, they're clearly trying to raise money for some fabulous project during coronavirus. I should make them a swinging offer. And so I did, and apparently it was reasonable because he'd been trying to sell it for ages. And that's what this thing is. I didn't want to go through all the ports now, but this port is a short one. And so Olympus only make, I think, 2 ports for their OMD housings now. There's a macro port, which is about that long, and I've got that because it suits the longer lenses I've got, and they make a short dome. And being Olympus's own, they are fearsomely expensive unless you sort of catch them for sale. So I bought the macro port when it was cheap, and I can only admire the powerful retail sort of strength of people who've bought the new dome, because it's a lovely little dome, but I think it's 800 plus. So when ports come up, if they're useful, it's worth snapping them up, because having someone else take the sting out of the depreciation is great. So this one is for a Panasonic macro lens, which I think I used briefly and found it actually very slower than either of the Olympus lenses, but your mileage may vary. I think perhaps I wasn't in tune with it, because I think a lot of the macro lenses need you to be to work in time with the way they move. And this was always the way with my SLR lenses, that if you knew what they were doing, you'd trigger them, they'd start to focus, and you'd be using that time. And then when they got close, you could let it off, and then you could let it hop in towards the subject, and you could be quite efficient. Whereas a lens where you don't know what it's going to do and you just press the control and wait for it, it seems like you're waiting for the end of the world somewhere. Anyway, so Olympus only make 2 ports at the moment for the OMD. I don't think they make any that they sell separately for the pens. And the story with the pens is the ports are fitted and you can't swap them. But that's clearly not true, because you can see the seam and you can take them off. So the chap I bought this from had a pen. Oh, Chris has held up his thing. Oh, Peter's held up his thing. I shall highlight Pete so he can show you his thing. You're highlighted, Pete.
Okay, cheers. What the pen housing looks like without the port. On the inside, as you can see down here, a little metal bracket, which normally has a L-shaped piece screwed into it. There's two, I don't know how well you can see, there's two screws in it with a hole in the middle. Hole in the middle takes the little L bracket, which locks the port in place. Take the screw out, remove the bracket, and then you can turn the port to remove it. Just on the bayonet.
Yeah.
There's two O-rings on it, like that. The Olympus ones are black, but these are independent ones. And this is a port I've made for fisheye, the 8mm Panasonic fisheye.
Excellent stuff.
There you go.
Excellent stuff. So as Pete says, there's two O-rings on that port, and normally the Olympus O-rings are black. And I think the nice Olympus O-rings, the squashy ones, are red, and they're quite soft. The black ones, I think technical term would be is bastard hard. They're really, really hard. And they're intended to stay there forever. Their story is that you would never move these ports. Those ports are fitted to the housings. Okay, nice to see you, John. And so the black O-rings are very hard. They can be driven in harder. And I'm sure Pete would back me up and say, when you first try to take the port off a pen, it feels like you're trying to snap the whole front off the housing. It's welded on because, well, it usually hasn't moved for a while. You've enjoyed the housing, it's settled in, it's had a wash of salt and stuff, and it feels like the thing is attached. And so I thought, as a fun thing for everyone, I'll show them me swapping the port over. I'll just see if I can move it. And I did not immediately have massive success. I found my strap wrenches are in my van, which is still 30 miles away. And so the next tool of choice is a fin strap to give you powerful rubbery hands so you can grip the little sods and wrench them round. So I was interested in a pen port, even though I haven't got any pens, because one of the weird things Olympus have done is, instead of making another port actually for the OMD, they sell this one with an adapter on the back. They never mention that they make an adapter, because the adapter takes this, which is the standard pen port, and makes it into an OMD fitting. And they don't tell anyone. I've tried to get them to confirm it publicly, and they won't. But they make an adapter. I think Athena make an adapter as well. So you can use pen ports on OMDs.
Do they sell many?
What do they sell? The adapters.
Yes, but do they sell many if they don't tell anybody about them?
It's never been listed as even a separate part. It is only sold with this port as the standard OMD port. It doesn't even have, I don't think it even has a public part number separately. So
oh, well.
I bought one of these because I wanted the adapter. And I wanted the adapter so I could put pen ports on my OMDs. And this is the kind of thing I wanted to do. So this port is shorter than the Olympus one. And Dawn uses the shorter macro lens. And annoyingly for Dawn, the standard port is over an inch longer, and the little 30mm macro lens can focus on its glass. And this is the kind of thing you can have problems with the TG, is you have to keep the front glass clean because the camera can actually focus on the case. And once it's focused on a lovely sharp drop of condensation, it is very hard to persuade it to look at anything else. And so Dawn's had sort of annoying periods with dives where you have to go and strongly light something else so the camera will try to focus outside the case. So this should work better for Dawn, but it's a pen lens. And the OMD port is another different one. You got that out? So now I've got my pen port. It's got the 2 black O-rings inside, and it's fitted into an adapter which has the 1 red O-ring on the outside. And you probably can't see too well. Oh, Jesus, it's only been on about 5 minutes, and the thing has already fixed itself with the power of, oh, it is now near immovable. But so this is now an OMD-able port, and it's got a couple of lugs on either side. So this one is actually very easy to get on and off, almost worryingly easy. So you push it in, turn it, and then that's done. And you might think, well, that's brilliant. Why couldn't they do that with the pen? And I think the thing is, the pen is double O-ringed, designed never to be moved, and usually all right. This one that's designed to be changed, they've put the red O-rings on, and the red O-rings are nice and soft, they're nice and squashy. They make a better seal when they're clean. But after a couple of months, sort of unmoved, salt works its way sort of up to it, crystallizes it, and starts to nudge them to one side. So after a couple of months, particularly if these are allowed to dry out, they start to seep. And so you have to take them off every now and again to clean them up, which any proper diver would say, well, that's the kind of maintenance you'd always do. But it's an unseen O-ring that you can't necessarily see. Backdoor O-rings, you see them, you can inspect them, you clean them often. But these hidden O-rings, like these port O-rings, are a vulnerability. And so it's worth being cautious about those. Oh, what else do I have? I have to say also, this port, again.
4 minutes left, Bob.
Okay. Okay, so this port is actually a CNC pattern port. They're called an Rdx pattern port. And they make ports for it, so you can get CNC ports, and CNC make adapters to other ports. And when this came out, Olympus made an adapter to their old SLR ports. So I've got some of those, and those are oldie worldy style, really big threads. So that they're quite nice. They never fall off, and you can afford to pick the whole housing up by the port because it's the strongest bit, which terrifies people with Icolite housings, which fatigue when you do stupid stuff like that with them. Anyway, so I think hopefully that's a whole selection of horrible ports and wet lenses and stuff. So because we've got 3 minutes to go or so, if I end this now, we could pop on and do a bit of a sort of question and answer kind of thing. People like that? Oh, I'm seeing some gestures and nods. So we'll do that. So I'll hang up and join me again in a moment, and I'll see you all. Cheers. So I'm not muting people as they come in now, because the idea, this is just a sort of a group chat bit. So as people gather, if you've got questions, you can just shout them out, and if anybody becomes unmanageable, then I'll have to beat you down with a stick of some kind. I was probably expecting that, I mean, Penny hopefully would feel superior in every way. You can just sort of steam into the water with your TG. You can do quite wide angle stuff, and you can do super macro stuff, and you don't really need to worry about much of this. For TG owners, you don't really need additional macro stuff. You could choose, if you wanted to add a wet lens. And because the wet lens thread on the TG is odd, I think it's 52, most people get an adapter and then use the standard size wide angle lenses. And they're expensive if you're putting them on the front of a TG, because this new costs the same as the camera, which is part of the course. And they're heavy. On a little housing, you've made the little housing either probably much more dense than it used to be, but they work pretty nicely, although you might not be able to zoom all the way out, because these are mostly made for cameras about 10 years ago, which had a slightly narrower field of view than the TGs do. The other things that are appearing are almost bubble-like, quite wide-angle adapters, where they've got a weak wide-angle adapter on the back and a cheap dome. And the Seafrog setups on eBay seem to be that kind of form. And I was very skeptical. I saw Owen Paisley's up in Scotland, and I thought it was a flat lens at the back, so no optical assistance, with a dome. But the back is slightly wide angle, and the dome recovers the loss from the flat front. So they're viable. They're not as wide as a strong optical wide angle adapter, but they're very light because they're mostly air. So you pays your money and takes your choice. Excellent. Any questions or suggestions or amusing anecdotes of dropping things? All very quiet. As I say, Pete, you were here, and you seem to be on the cusp of starting a career in buying pens and their accessories.
Not specifically.
Well, not you, Pete. The other Pete.
Pete. Right. Pete.
Yeah, but Pete's keeping himself muted, which he can, so he can keep himself to himself. But you have a number of pens, Pete, or you just got the one?
I've actually got two camera bodies, the same PL5s, just the one housing, which I really got just to must be 5-6 years ago now, and it was really just to see what the Micro Four Thirds system had to offer, and it was sort of entry level camera, which I knew a number of people that had that end of the price point cameras. And yeah, so it's see what it was about and see whether I could get on with it. It was smaller, it was lighter, it was certainly a lot cheaper than SLR. So yeah.
Yeah, I think on the whole, I think on the whole the pens are lovely. They're just really nice little cameras. It's almost a pity that the housings are they're a size and a half up. You get a really tough housing for them, but there's no denying it could be made quite a lot smaller. And a lot of that size is because they've made the port interchangeable and never promoted it, which is quite a shame. So, I mean, for the pens, you can get a whole load of ports like that short macro one. Pete makes a nice range, as he's demonstrated. But if Pete weren't able to manufacture something, there's quite a good choice of domes, because you can put all the lenses that are made for OMDs or pens on the pen, obviously, and you can buy a setup for less than £300 that you can put fantastic lenses on the front. So you can go and do world-class fisheye on fabulous reefs with a camera that when you take it back on land will fit in your pocket near flat. Because technically they're pretty much as good as the OMDs. And the problem with lots of other cameras is you can't get nice little lenses because their legacy is SLRs. So I mean the Sonys are nice, but some of their lenses are huge, aren't they? And once you get onto the nice lenses, they're made to work on bigger cameras, so there's much less pressure on them to keep the system size down. It's one of those things. Excellent. So what other toys do we have? I guess one of the things I could mention is that we mentioned before, you have to have rings on these lenses to operate them, because most of them aren't electronic. Even the ones that are electronic usually require that you move something on the lens. Because you can take the camera and the lens apart, you can't dedicate controls on the camera to the lens, so they come in two parts. So pen and OMD housings have knobs on, and so you need zoom rings, and so the zoom rings are a further part of the system expense and are on a per lens basis. The other things you find is you might have bought a nice sort of macro lens, or you've got a nice port, and then you find it's a particular length and other lenses don't fit in it. And I think I said last week that sort of this is the nice zoom lens that Olympus do. And the problem is if you buy a port that's the right length for it when it's wide angle, you can't then use it when it's long. And this happens with a lot of housings and a lot of cameras, where once you have a lens housing that is this wide or this long, so you can work it when it's zoomed out, unfortunately, they're always shortish, pretty much shortest when they zoom in. And then the front glass needs to be pretty big for it not...
A dome of the right sort of diameter, set it up for the wide angle or the shortest physical length, and if it's big enough, then there'll be enough room for the narrower angle, and hopefully that's the longer physical length, without it smashing into the inside of the dome.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's, unfortunately, that's obviously a compromise, because like we said before, if you've got a dome port, you're trying to put the optical center of the lens at the center of the dome. And if the thing moves backwards and forwards, that might be impossible. It's only going to be right at one point.
Optically, yes, it's always a compromise. Dome ports are always a compromise, unless it's specifically designed for it. Like the mega expensive Nikonos RS of 20 years ago, 25 years ago even. But it's possible to get them working pretty well, from my experience anyway.
Yeah, and mine too. I mean, the nice ports work well.
Yeah.
And the glass one I've got works very well. I tried the little Olympus mini dome, and that's a lovely little thing, and that they work really well. But when you're going sort of off the map, because this is a lens which they don't make a zoom ring for, and they don't even tell you how to use it in a port. So if it's a nice lens, I'd like to get some use out of it, then you're...
Is that the 1240?
Yeah, that's the 1240. Yeah. So that's nice for taking pictures of seaweed in the shallows. That's why I like that one for. And so if you were going to try and fit it, you can go for a dome, but then the fact that this thing can focus within a couple of centimeters of the front is lost. So you can put them in flat ports as well, but that gives you a long, bulky port that can't do wide angle. So it's always a compromise. And when you're fitting odd lenses, then having sort of these extension rings is useful, because you can say, okay, well, today I go out, I like the lens, because it collects a lot of light and it's nice and sharp. And today I want to use it behind a flat piece of glass because I'll use its sort of semi-close-up range, and I can go a bit wide because that's useful. If I see a fun-looking crab, if the port's not long enough, you can't zoom in and out because the thing will actually hit the glass. And so when I dive with these, although on land I put filters on my land lenses to stop me. See how easy they are to drop over the edge of the reef. I put sort of thin glass lenses on them to protect them. In the dome, you don't want that to happen because these lenses are mostly plastic front, so they can nudge a dome even if it's quite close. But these would cut and scratch it. So always take your filters off when you're going underwater. Excellent. I've heard from Pete that he's being quiet because normally he's pretty chatty, but there's a lot of music practice and things going on. So I think Pete's a trombonist, which sounds like fantastic sort of exercise to me. And maybe we'll get together and we can do a mass music thing. Unfortunately, I can only play kazoo. That's my limit. Anyway, if people are drawing to a close, I'm quite happy not to extend this into everybody's evening and destroy all your time. I'd say hopefully that's hopefully for Pete says not if you have to do it all day, and I don't know whether he's talking about self-abuse or trombone playing, but either way it's not fun if you have to do it all the time. Takes the joy out of it, I'd imagine. Excellent. So the idea of this was for people who are sort of have a TG, like Pete up in Scotland and Penny, then you can see there's a step of just system complication and bits you need to even start to emulate the range that the TG gives you. The macro range, you definitely need a wet lens or a different port, and maybe then a different port and a wet lens. And as soon as you go wide, life gets complicated again. You might buy a dome, and that's tough to get on with. For pen people like Ross and Pete and me, I'm a pen person some of the time. It's probably nice to see, because you never see all the bits all the time that everybody can sell. It's a lot of it's second hand. So I think my friend who had this used his 1240 lens with it, and that's why this one is machined out inside, because nobody ever thought that you'd use this lens on the front of a pen and the port is too small. And so this was machined out so that there was space to have a zoom ring to control this lens. And so I had to print him up a special thin one. And so that's why this is shiny inside, because it's a non-standard thing. And as soon as you go sort of off map, off the beaten path, you're into weird stuff. And so hopefully Dawn oh, sorry, Pete.
Sorry, the pen port was designed long before the 1240 f2.8 was thought about, so it wasn't designed for it.
Well, I think there's no denying it wasn't designed for it, but I think it wasn't a massive stretch to say that if you restrict the size of a hole, you're restricting the size of the things that can go through it. And it was always envisaged that the pens would be followed by the OMDs. So it was a bit of a shame that the pen ports were small, unnecessarily small, really. But they did retain the same reference point on the OMD housings. So you can take something geared for a pen housing and take it straight into an OMD housing, and the lenses work the same in the same ports, albeit Olympus never tell you that you can buy the adapter, which is great fun. I'm just trying to sell my other one to a Dutch person at the moment, and trying to, everybody talks in terms of a standard port, but they don't know it's 2 bits. So you see, okay, so I've just built up this ever huger collection. I suppose the last thing I should say about the pens is that the big ports, like this one, the official way of putting a wet lens on the front is to buy a £50 adapter, which leaves you with something that's held on like a lens cap, which means you can have your £200 macro lens on the front of a £50 adapter, which can fall away ever so rapidly.
It's essentially that lens cap with a hole in it.
Well, it is, and that's what I've done to these in the past, to get a hole saw and just go through the middle of that, and then get a step down ring,
Glue it in.
step up ring, and fix it on. So you can effectively you can upgrade these with a hole saw and a £2 adapter from eBay to hold macro lenses. But the actual custom narrow ports are a whole lot nicer, because then you can get your light in much closer to the glass, whereas those sort of flared trumpet fronted ones are a bit of a pain. And that's my final word on the subject.